Thank you, Kendra Jo, for the welcome, and thank you all for lending me your ears so late in the afternoon. I hope that that second cup of coffee is kicking in. Thank you also for inviting me to the summit. I rode the tiniest plane I've ever seen in my life to get here, but I was only mildly terrified, but from the window I could see how beautiful Maine is this time of year, and I also have really been inspired by seeing the connections made today and seeing the conversations that are happening. So thank you all for allowing me to speak. Like Kendra Jo said, my name is Anna Higgins. I work for an organization called the Internet Society. We are a global, nonpartisan nonprofit. We're founded by the founders of the internet, like Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, and our purpose, our charge, is to keep the internet open and accessible and trustworthy, and we do that through our work on policy and standards and through our research. So the way I describe it to other people is that we really focus on the infrastructural level of the internet. I work for the North America Regional Bureau. I'm a research analyst, and we focus our work in the US and Canada. And when we talk about our access work, we really try to think about what are the hardest to reach places that we could get to. And a lot of the time, these are Indigenous and tribal communities. They're not only geographically isolated, but they have some significant institutional barriers from connectivity. Like the last panel said, sometimes there's just one or two words in a piece of legislation or in a regulation that doesn't intentionally alienate them, but it does. So a lot of our work centers on that. One big thing that we have coming up is our Indigenous Connectivity Summit. It is going to be November 12th and 13th. And our purpose for that is to bring together Indigenous and tribal leaders to discuss similar challenges that they face, but also lessons learned along the way, and to create recommendations that we can give to policymakers. When we're planning our ICS, I call it the ICS, we try to showcase different terrains intentionally to show that even though they're from vastly different places, they can share a lot of the same struggles and a lot of the same solutions. Like we've been talking about all day, every community is different, but there are a lot of similarities that you can find with one another. So in 2017, our first ICS was in Santa Fe, or an hour outside of Santa Fe, in the desert. In 2018, it was in Inuvik, which is a town in the Northwest Territories of Canada in the literal Arctic. And then this year, it's going to be in Hilo and Waimanalo, Hawaii, which is a tropical location. Clearly, all of these locations are incredibly different, but that's the point, is that they all face a lot of the same challenges. And I'm going to talk about three things that we do. I'm going to talk about a training webinar series that we piloted this year and just finished about a week ago. And I'm going to talk about our summit itself, and then I'm going to talk about our on-site technical training and build-out that we're doing this year. So first, our trainings. They were about 6 weeks long, and they were via webinar. The first one was about policy and advocacy. So for this one, we really want to give people the skills to navigate and communicate with, in the US, Congress and the FCC and their state governments, but in Canada, Parliament and the ministries and the CRTC, which is like the Canadian FCC. We also want to give them the skills to advocate for community broadband in their own communities. You need that community buy-in, and you need to learn how to create a grassroots movement to get that community buy-in so you can build out a community network. That leads me to our second webinar series, which was on community networks. It was focusing on the soft skills. I use air quotes because they're not really soft skills. It's about like running a business of a network, and it's about marketing a network. How do you get people to sign up? How do you worry about that take rate? And then also the technical skills. So what are the different types of models? What does wired versus wireless even mean if you're a beginner? What the heck is spectrum? I ask myself that every day. And also network security. How do you make sure your network's going to be secure? So with those trainings, we were able to train a lot of participants in some Indigenous and tribal communities. And we're going to bring some of them to our summit, which I'm going to talk about next. We have three goals for our summit, like I mentioned earlier, to discuss similar challenges, share lessons, and create recommendations. So that recommendations piece is quite literally a one-pager with really succinct recommendations that policymakers and their staff can really easily digest. And then we also do a longer fleshed out report with what we talked about at the summit. Some challenges that communities face. One thing that they face a lot that was surprising to me when I learned about it is that some communities are so close to fiber backhaul and they just don't have access to it because they're just totally bypassed. So for instance, we're working with a community in Waimanalo in Hawaii, which is on Oahu. It's about a 45-minute drive away from Honolulu, which is not far, but it's pretty remote and rural and isolated from the rest of the island. And it's a native Hawaiian community, so they're tribal. But they can literally see Hawaii Telecom building out fiber backhaul from their community, and they don't have access to it. That's clearly an issue, and this is an issue that a lot of Indigenous and tribal communities share. We also like to talk about lessons learned. We also like to talk about what you can do with the internet once you have it. There's a really interesting use case for Indigenous and tribal communities in that the internet can really help preserve their cultures and languages. Their cultures and languages are dying out at a really concerning rate. But they're really awesome case studies that we can use. So for example, there is a company called Ogoki Learning. It's founded by a First Nations man in Canada named Derek Baxter. And he founded it so he could create a language learning app so his daughter could learn Ojibwe, which is his native language. And he has, because of the internet, he has been able to release the source code online. And so other native, Indigenous and tribal communities can use that source code and create their own language learning apps for their own native languages. So I think there's a really interesting use case here for why the internet matters so much to these communities. The third thing I wanted to talk about was our on-site technical training. We do a technical training every year at our ICS. This year we're doing a build out. We're doing a network build in that Native Hawaiian community of Waimanalo, and we're super excited about it. We have been able to pull together our partners who are technologists and our technologists at our own organization to figure out a network for this community. And so we're going to do that build out while we're there. I have a few takeaways and lessons. Many of these come from the recommendations one pager that I referenced earlier. The first is that it's really important to have a tech-neutral and flexible approach. If I had one wish, I would love it if we all had fiber backhaul and fiber to the home, but that's just not how the world works, and that's not the solution for every community. So we need to be more innovative and creative and be flexible with our tech when we are trying to devise these solutions. And then my second, and I think my most important point, is echoing what Bob Coleman said this morning. It's really important to meet people where they're at. These communities, you need to consult with them if you're a provider or if you're kind of like a facilitator like we are. It's really important to physically show up, first of all, have that face-to-face interaction. The whole point is that they have bad connectivity, so you're not going to get a Zoom conference call with them. And it's important to ask them what they need, and because no one knows what they need like they do. So one example of how we try to do this is we work with a community called Uluhuktuk. It is in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and it kind of reminds me of the islands here in Maine. It's very cold, and you also need to take a mildly terrifying tiny plane to get there. And so what we did was we went to Uluhuktuk. We brought Tim Hortons because they love Tim Hortons and they don't have one there. And we said, we would love to connect you. How do you feel about that? And they said, yes, we would love connectivity. And then we said, we have these webinars we want to put on, and we want you to watch them, and if you want. And they said, yes. And we said, okay, what barriers do you have to doing these webinars? And they said, well, we don't have connectivity at home, so we can't watch them at home. We can't download any resources you send us. How can we fix this? And so what we did was we took laptops, we pre-downloaded all these resources onto them, shipped them up to Uluhuktuk so they have them on hard drives. We formed a partnership with the school, which is the only anchor institution that has connectivity enough, that's good enough to stream webinars, and we got them to stream the webinars. We're going to send up USBs with the recordings on them. We had a call-in option, so if the internet went down, they could just call in, and they're able to tune into the webinars, and they're going to be able to have the recordings as reference moving forward. And so we're really excited with how that turned out. And I think this just goes to show that lack of accessibility to resources doesn't mean there's a lack of community will at all. So to wrap up, I would really encourage you all to go to internetsociety.org. If you go to our events page, you can check out the ICS. You can register to watch via live stream. I wish we could all be in Hawaii together, but I know that's as unrealistic as fiber to the home for everybody. But definitely watch it via live stream. Become a member of the Internet Society. It is free. It provides you access to a number of discussion fora where you can talk to different people who are working on community networks and other internet infrastructure related issues. And finally, you can reach out to me at Higgins, my last name, at isoc.org if you want to chat further. I'm happy to chat. Thank you so much for your ears today. Have a great rest of your day.